Well, welcome everyone. We're so pleased to have you here today. I'm Elena Carruthers, Vice President of Friends of Calligraphy, and um, I'm pleased to welcome you to our first lecture in 2025. Our speaker, Lily Yee-Sloan, will be sharing her journey as an artist in just a few minutes. I want to do some housekeeping things first. If you don't have your name in your little screen, please put it there. Otherwise, we won't know who you are, and we don't want to have any problems. Um, Secondly, please use the chats for questions only, preceded by 3 question marks. Lily will take questions at the end, and you can do them speaking as well. But if you have any that you want to ask on chat, you may do that. And please use the chat for questions and not for greeting each other, because that takes up a lot of chat space and we can't find the questions. We'll appreciate that a lot. I think that that's it for housekeeping. So Lily will be sharing her story about the people and events that have shaped her life as a lettering artist, including her development as a calligrapher and the lessons she's learned from the stumbling over those stumbling blocks. Lily will also offer tips for staying motivated. Like many of us, Lily had a career, or in her case, careers, before calligraphy. She worked in laboratory medicine, university governance, and communications. Now Lily works out of her home studio in Toronto, Canada, where she experiments with tools and materials, expanding the boundaries of calligraphy to express her words and those of others, deepening their meaning by combining the message with her designs. Many instructors have influenced Lily's approach to text art, most notably Brody Neuenschwander and Laurie Doctor, who have each given lectures for Friends of Calligraphy, which can be found on our resources page in our website. And this one will also be recorded and posted there. The formats of Lily's art range from books to boxes to clothing to glass to stone. For several years, she's been designing artist books. Recently, she began honing her bookbinding skills, influenced by binders Dawn Taylor and Barbara Hillander. Lily has been teaching over 25 years, and her experience has enabled her to understand the needs of each of her students. She helps them build incrementally on their skills and strives to inspire original expression. She's thrilled when a student lights up with discovery and experiences that aha moment. Lily's artwork has been exhibited in galleries in North America, published in various books and periodicals, including Letter Arts Review, and has her work in private collections in Canada and abroad. Lily understands that each artist walks his own path. She encourages calligraphers to stay motivated in their practice and to follow their own compass on the journey as learners and lovers of letters. Thank you, Lily, for sharing your journey with us.
Well, thank you, Elena, for that introduction and for your warm welcome. I'm honored to be invited by the Friends of Calligraphy to share my story. And I want to thank Evelyn and Nancy as they collaborate with you to co-host.
Thank you.
My gratitude to Raul for his technical expertise and for the announcements that called us all together here today. And to all of you, I want to add my word of welcome. So let me share my screen. Elena, can you?
Yes, it's perfect.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This lecture series is the brainchild of Evelyn Eldridge, who developed it during COVID isolation. It is geared primarily to calligraphers who like to work with alphabet-related symbols. However, some of you wear other hats. Perhaps you are visiting and are curious about what we do. You have come to this forum as a painter, a stone carver, perhaps a bookbinder, or you design with fiber, paper, glass, wood, or metal. Did I miss mentioning your medium? Whatever it is, count yourself in on today's journey. Art is woven into a rich tapestry. Common threads bind us together. We are connected. I hope you'll find something here that speaks to your journey. During the presentation, you may have questions about materials. To simplify communication, details appear directly on the slide as seen in this example. Since the materials are listed, you can see them immediately or else refer to them later in the recording. If there's no list, there's no list. Our time together is fleeting, and this convenience gives us more bandwidth to focus on the approaches of what we love to do. This is Django, my sister-in-law's curious cat. In case you arrived after Elena's announcement, Django is here to remind you to put your question in the chat preceded by 3 question marks. This way, Elena, Evelyn, and Nancy can spot your questions quickly and not overlook them. And this makes their job easier. There's a certain pacing that works for this type of slideshow, and grouping questions to answer at the end of the presentation allows for a smoother flow. The presentation is an hour long, so hang in there. I look forward to answering your queries. There are lots of stories to tell and 190 slides to view, so let's begin. In this presentation, I'll tell stories about the things that art has taught me. There is much to say about the people and events that have influenced me as an artist. Over 40 years ago, I took my first calligraphy class. I packed 1 Osmeroid pen and 1 bottle of Pelican ink. Little did I know that it would be the beginning of a lifelong venture. But first, a brief background about what attracted me to calligraphy. As a young child, I was fascinated by handwriting. This is a letter my mother received from her brother, who lived in Hong Kong. The only thing I can make out is our house number, 223. I treasure the letter because it came from the hand of someone special. This is a postcard from my friend who is traveling in Africa. He and I worked together for many years before our careers took us in different directions. Besides handwriting, I was also fascinated by calligraphy. This is a greeting card from my friend Joan Gooderham, who sent it to lift my spirits while I waited for surgery. A book by Rosie Kelly, one of her handmade pastepaper books. Rosie's book, Joan's card, my friend's postcard, and my uncle's letter all mark a moment in time. Even though the writers are no longer with us, the marks they made by hand live on. These letters were carved by Louis Wint on an old brick wall at the University of Toronto. It was an exterior wall exposed to winter weather. As a result, the clay crumbled unpredictably while Louis was carving. A page from the St. John's Bible, painted by Thomas Ingmeyer, gouache on vellum and gold leaf over gesso. A painting by Karen Akoff using gouache and watercolor, the simplicity of one exquisite letter combined with the beauty of a painted image. It was compositions like these that attracted me to calligraphy. In this presentation, I want to focus on several topics. I'll share personal stories about my artwork, materials I have used to create that artwork, tools to make marks and letters, and techniques I've learned along the way. Finally, I'll close with a few lessons that art has taught me about life. Art Art is an expression of many things, including what I think and believe. To share my art is to expose who I am. While there's a certain vulnerability in that, my hope is that something here will speak to you and encourage you on your own artist's journey. For context, let me share a bit about my background. My parents immigrated from China and arrived in Canada to start a family. My mom was a seamstress and homemaker. My dad operated a small business. As you can see, he was not a button-up kind of guy. I was a baby boomer, born in Toronto. I still have bad hair days, and I'm not crazy about having my picture taken. Santa delivered a big box of Crayolas. They were perfect for drawing on the walls of our house. Needless to say, my parents were not as impressed as I thought they should be. However, they did allow me to continue drawing on the walls, but only in pencil and only in the bedrooms. In the photo on the bottom left is my wall drawing. It was always a challenge to get good coverage with a pointed pencil. In our house, no one scolded me for making art. They just redirected me to where I could do it. This is my earliest calligraphy. On the left, the practice sheet was done in my first calligraphy class in 1981. On the right, 4 years later, my lettering was improving. I was a science major, and after my dad died of cancer, I was inspired to study laboratory medicine. Like my dad, I'm not a button-up kind of gal. Following graduation, I worked at a Toronto hospital. After 4 years in pathology, it was time to see what else I could do. Eventually, I became a communications coordinator where I managed print and digital media. Besides my love of science, I was also a word nerd and enjoyed crafting information to make it clear and presentable. That's what also attracted me to calligraphy, making text meaningful and attractive. In 1986, I happily stumbled on the Calligraphic Arts Guild of Toronto. The best way to meet people was to jump right in. I joined the executive and wrote feature articles for the Guild's newsletter. In the 80s, calligraphy was flourishing. The Guild had 200 members. It was an exciting time to be a learner and lover of letters. Because I am methodical and thorough, I can lose track of the urgent, big picture. In my artwork, I like to relate the materials to the message, which always takes time to research and plan. Volunteering to do calligraphy provided good practice. Having a deadline forced me to establish a standard and to know when the work was good enough and finished. Projects we do for others have guidelines and deadlines. However, personal projects give me complete freedom. This fan was created to commemorate the first Mother's Day following my mom's passing. The fan features words of wisdom from my mom. For display, the fan is mounted on a brass base and stays open with steel plates embedded in the first and last accordion folds, weighting down the extremities. This piece was created for my first calligraphy exhibit. I did not realize that corrections were allowed, so I continued to redo the lettering until it was perfect. In those days, the Guild was so large that there was not enough room to display everyone's work. So art was juried before it was accepted for exhibition. As a newcomer, I did not feel confident about my lettering, and I was definitely not prepared to be rejected. However, much to my relief, this piece was accepted. Several days later, a buyer called. It was the affirmation I needed to consider myself an artist. How interesting that the opinion of a complete stranger could have such an impact on my self-identity. In 1991, I took a year-long course with Reggie Azell. The curriculum provided the basics for exploring the fundamentals of lettering. This was a homework assignment for one of Reggie's classes. On a trip to Paris, I fell in love with the rose window in Notre Dame Cathedral. As I experimented with the composition of While God Waits, I made 2 trials. A chaplain heard about my design and was intrigued by the message. He worked with prison inmates. I gave him one of the trials for his office. It's heartwarming when your art speaks to another person. Besides paper, I was interested in working on other materials. While shopping for canvas sneakers, I had the idea to paint letters on the canvas. Besides canvas, I was curious about etching on glass. The spice jars in the kitchen got a makeover with permanent labels. I learned to prepare glass for sandblasting, which cuts deeper than etching cream for a more sculpted effect. The Chinese symbol for crane is sandblasted in reverse on the backside of the glass, inside the frame. The Toronto Guild gave me the opportunity to teach. I'm especially thrilled when a student experiences an aha moment and lights up with discovery. Here I'm co-teaching with Susan Mentis. Here's Susan in the center. Reggie Azell returned to Toronto to teach his advanced curriculum. He had taught us the fundamentals 3 years earlier, and now we were ready to move on to other topics like sandblasting on glass and gilding with gesso. Here we are, geared up for stone carving. Alabaster is a soft stone that can be hand carved. These letters are not incised in the traditional way, but are raised in relief. The details of the letters are fine-tuned using an electric Dremel. The stone surrounding the letters is removed with a chisel and mallet. What you see represents 2 days of carving. Although I was satisfied with the letter shapes, I did not feel the presentation enhanced the message. I chose to start again. Sometimes you have to release an idea to make room for a better idea. After having a good cry, I chiseled off the letters. That was a commitment to the new composition. If it did not work, there was no going back to the original. Here I am sanding the back of the stone. It offered a shape with greater potential for the composition. The text was carved a second time. The letters emerge from half a heart. The thumb comes around from the right, where you can see the outline of a flat hand. Initially, I wanted to sculpt the entire hand, but after carving the thumb, decided that stone sculpture would be a skill for another day.
Sort of, it is on a webpage, very tiny.
The graphic elements in the second effort better enhance the meaning of the text. This is a quote from Othello. After Othello was deceived into killing his beloved wife, he exclaims, "My heart is turned to stone. I strike it and it hurts my hand." This project taught me to think deeply about a design before starting. While it's exciting to start working right away, sometimes it means settling on the obvious. By taking time to think through an idea, it's gratifying to see how far a concept can be imagined. The Canadian Bookbinders and Book Artists Guild offered an introductory bookbinding class. Following the workshop, I made a number of hardcover blank journals to practice the new skills I learned. I love the tactile feel of textured paper and deckled edges. Sewing signatures and binding books was satisfying. It gave me a new option for calligraphy, besides canvas, glass, and stone. I enjoyed binding blank journals, but was interested in creating books to showcase calligraphy. After learning how to make an accordion book, I completed a series of books that featured haikus about winter. In a book of poems written by Joseph Bailey, I stumbled on a wonderful text about a packing box under pressure. The words were begging to be written on an actual box. I was binding books, but did not know anything about making boxes. I heard that Toronto binder Don Taylor built storage boxes for museum pieces, so I sought him out for a class. I became fascinated with box making and spent a further week making box structures with Don at the Haliburton School of the Arts. This is a jewelry box featuring compartments lined with book cloth and covered with leather. A roll case covered with Japanese paper and lined with leather. In 1996, a listing of Canadian calligraphers was published in a book titled ABC Canada. Each of the 95 artists was invited to design an alphabet. I composed a text and wrote it in pointed brush, along with a traditional and experimental Roman variation. Back to paper. This piece is titled Alpha and Omega. The names of the Greek alphabet are spelled out. Alpha and Omega was part of a traveling exhibit that toured North America for 2 years. The text is a scripture verse from the book of Revelation. However, the inspiration came from a beer commercial. At the time, Molson Canadian had a marketing campaign based on the theme, I am Canadian. Synchronicity can come from the most disparate worlds. A woman living in Sudbury, 4 hours north of Toronto, contacted me about a project. We had never met, and she had not seen my calligraphy. This was in the dark ages, before social media, when people communicated by telephone. She explained that her teenage daughter was studying in Scotland and had written a poem expressing her homesickness at being away from her mom over Christmas. The woman wondered if I would be willing to letter the poem in black on white and have it framed. She outlined her budget. As we talked, it became clear that this poem held deep personal significance and called for something to be held in the hand rather than mounted on a wall for everyone to see. I suggested a book structure that could be opened for display or enjoyed privately. We settled on colors other than black and white. After working with the words, I felt the powerful emotion of the poem deserved the fullest expression. I set the budget aside. Counting the cost would limit creative scope. The 16-page accordion book was a labor of love and gave me great joy to complete. Ultimately, I made 2 copies, so mother and daughter, separated by the Atlantic Ocean, could each have her own copy. A decade later, her husband heard that my husband and I were renovating our house. He was now the president of a custom cabinet company and offered to design and install our kitchen cabinets. Our kitchen is a reminder of what can happen when you open your heart without counting the cost to share what you love. Since I'm naturally curious and love to learn, I take focused classes in the 3 areas that interest me most. The annual conferences have also been rich environments for learning. I meet instructors and students whose skills inspire me on my artist's journey. At the 2008 conference in Chicago, I chatted with several women while waiting in the cafeteria line. We did not know each other well, but we decided to share a table. Over lunch, we talked about the widespread interest in Rosie Kelly's workshops on paste paper. It was suggested that a manual for making artists' books would fill a gap. Marianne David already owned several of Rosie's handmade books. As an entrepreneur, she was open to new project proposals. Graphic designer Angie Vangelis had already developed a book format for another publication. She thought the same format would be a good fit. A coordinator was needed to guide Rosie through a series of drafts and edit the content. As it turned out, the four of us had the necessary skills to write and publish a book. The book launched in 2012. Rosie and Marianne have since passed on, but this book has found a home in the libraries of calligraphers and book artists around the globe. It's mysterious what can happen when four calligraphers line up for lunch. Incidentally, the theme of that conference was Letters Mingle Souls. At one of the conferences, I took two classes. The first was on Roman capitals with Peter Thornton. The second was lettering on canvas with Lisa Engelbrecht. At the time, it seemed like a smart idea to practice Romans on canvas. However, unprimed canvas is absorbent and just soaks up the acrylic ink. That means each letter needs to be built up with 3 to 4 layers. This is slow and laborious work. However, drawing the Romans in this careful way helped me see the nuances of form and pay attention to line quality. In the end, it was worth the effort. While acrylic paint is relatively permanent, there are occasions to use paint made especially for textiles that render fabric washable. That led me to explore lettering on clothing and other fabric items that can be laundered. At the time, I was raising funds for cancer research. One year, I honored donors by lettering their names on a tank top that was worn during the marathon. This is flat brush lettering on a yoga top. Textile paint is ideal for natural fibers like cotton and linen, but not bamboo. Bamboo is a natural fiber, but these paints were not made for bamboo. Sadly, the paint did not bond to the bamboo fibers and the letters faded after several cycles in the wash. However, they lasted until I got to the finish line. Sometimes good enough has to be good enough. Sometimes I need to study with an instructor more than once. This was the case with Brody Neunschwander, the tall man in the center. To understand his concepts fully and integrate them in my work, I've taken his week-long story development class 3 times. In this photo from the 2012 conference in Portland, students are standing behind a class project showcasing techniques we learned in Brody's workshop. You may recognize some faces here. Standing beside Brody is Amity Parks, Meredith Klein, and me. In that workshop, I wrote about my father's death. Designing a book and working with my own words proved to be therapeutic. Back home, I worked in the studio for a month, finishing the 40 pages. It's a very personal book that not many people will see, but it represents the kind of healing that can come from immersing myself in art. There are occasions when a mistake presents a challenge that is really an opportunity. Rather than starting again, as I did multiple times with my first exhibition piece, I look for ways to incorporate mistakes. Mistakes happen when I'm rushing to finish. Just when I think I'm done, I'm not. I accidentally smeared Sumi ink on the back of this book cover just as it was being bound. The paper is Reeves BFK, a soft printmaking paper. Because of its soft surface, Reeves does not respond well to correction. I decided to camouflage the smudge using tiny lettering. The same treatment appears along the bottom edge. It's not what I planned, but the correction adds texture and contrast that give the cover more interest. There is the chance that a mistake just becomes a bigger mistake. That's a risk. But the more often I embrace mistakes, the less disruptive they feel, and the more confident I become about approaching mistakes and letting them lead. In the process of resolving dilemmas, I become better at problem solving. As a result, mistakes don't disrupt my plans because I hold plans loosely. In this handmade book, I started with several marks and then reacted to them, proceeding one step at a time. Sometimes I work on multiple pieces simultaneously to avoid getting stuck in a pattern. It's adventurous to work this way. This is the approach to design I've shared with students in my class, Freewheeling Design Without Fear. Bookmarks toured as part of an exhibit organized by the Canadian Bookbinders and Book Artists Guild, traveling across Canada for 2 years before it closed in 2020. I've completed a series of about 30 books this way, starting with text, but without any plan for where the design will go. The same text may be used more than once, but each version is different. Of course, not all mistakes turn out to be successful recoveries, and when they're on good paper, this seems wasteful, but I simply save whatever is salvageable. When I work in a series, the discards become good raw material for other works in the same series because they share the same color palette, marks made by the same tools, and integrity of materials. Colors, marks, and materials. That makes it easier to repurpose and incorporate the materials into other works in the same series. This is my second attempt at Ebony and Ivory. I finished the pages for the first version and bound the book. Several days later, I was looking at it with fresh eyes and was unhappy with the page progression. I took the sewing apart and reworked the pieces by adding new marks and incorporating discards from other projects. Working with the same text gives me a chance to expand the design concept or experiment with multiple variations. This freedom takes them in different directions, some with slight variations and others with wide-ranging scope.
Okay. I clicked on, I
Because
will have access to the recording.
Because I've already researched the text and the materials, I can delve deeper into teasing out the meaning. Here's another way that I've worked spontaneously. In the summer of 2019, I joined a handful of artists for an experiment to jumpstart a disciplined approach to our art practice. Carol Dubosh volunteered to coordinate a plan, and thus the August project was born. The challenge was to work in the studio every day and create one finished piece by the end of the day. This gave us an intensive approach to our studio practice. My strategy was to make it daily and doable. We each developed a concept. Not surprisingly, I chose to design a book with one page for each day of the month. In my household, there were lots of gatherings that month, including a visit from out-of-towners. I decided to make a book about family. They have a wonderful sense of humor and say some quirky things. Each day, I selected one random conversation and designed a page for it. I didn't tell my family beforehand what I was doing. That way, they could be free to be themselves, and I could be free to eavesdrop. I have the utmost respect for my family, so no embarrassing conversations or dark secrets were recorded. Some conversations were serious, others were trivial, and some were downright hilarious. All of them captured a moment in time. The page headings were hand-lettered and the text was typed on a vintage Remington that belonged to my father-in-law. I made mock-ups of different binding options. I settled on a format that requires no sewing, a drumleaf binding. This results in page spreads that are not interrupted with stitching in the fold. When the pages were assembled, reading the entries felt like eavesdropping, so the title of the book became Lean In. The structure for this project was established early. By that, I mean the decisions about page size and text positioning were made first. Then the content developed as I snatched it from the air out of daily conversations. Determining the book structure first, before knowing the content, is another approach to working spontaneously. This is a reversal of my normal approach to freewheeling. The August project led to another study opportunity that came along several months later. Instead of a commitment for 1 month, it extended to a full year. Scribbled Lives is a group of calligraphers who commit to producing artwork on a regular basis. The goal is to develop the discipline of consistent practice. Carol Dubois is the group's administrator and designed the logo. Every week, I had the pleasure of viewing about 75 pieces of art related to the same topic. We all responded to the same weekly prompt. Because it's a private group on Facebook, artwork is only seen by its members. That makes it a safe and supportive environment in which to try new things to share with other members. One week, the prompt was to study the work of a lettering artist. I chose Belgian calligrapher Lisbeth Boudens, who is known for her drawn capitals. Scribbled Lives boosted my motivation and prompted me to do my best work. As it turns out, this community became a lifeline during the early days of COVID. The momentum of the group allowed me to focus on art. Waking up and rushing to the studio to try a new idea was therapeutic. It strengthened my resilience. Certainly, it was a welcome diversion from the daily onslaught of news about the pandemic. I rescued this scrap of marbled paper from the recycling bin in the studio. The pattern reminded me of something I might see under a microscope in a pathology lab. It was perfect for a piece about the isolation of quarantine. One of my favorite Scribbled Lives prompts was The Garden of Forking Paths. It's the title of a short story by Jorge Luis Borges. In the story, a novel is presented, but it makes no sense. The novel's seemingly incompatible storylines present the idea of the bifurcation or splitting of time rather than space, a fork in time rather than a fork in the road. In other words, whenever the characters come to a point at which more than one outcome is possible, both outcomes occur. This causes the story to branch out into multiple narrative universes, which then provide the scenarios for new bifurcations in outcomes. In a collage workshop, I was learning to incorporate maps in my art. As the pandemic unfolded, it was becoming clear that COVID would drastically change the landscape of my life. The notion of travel was fraught with angst and uncertainty. To venture abroad or to stay home, to risk travel or to shelter in place. I connected this dilemma with the theme of Borges' story, place versus time. 2 panels were built and housed in a clamshell box, one representing place, the compass on the left, and the other representing time, the clock on the right. The moving hands on the compass and the clock represent change. They mark the multiple scenarios movements have on outcomes in the novel. On the hands of both the compass and clock face, tiny text is written. They look like scribbles. Also, on the clock face, tiny text forms a frame around the map. Although the words are not legible, the design hinges on their meaning. When closed, the clamshell box protects the moving parts. The Garden of Forking Paths was still on my mind the following week, when the prompt was textures. Imminence of a revelation is a phrase lifted from Borges' short story. I was inspired by experimental lettering developed by Anne van Hentenryck. She creates letters with movement and texture. While the text is completely legible, the composition leans more on the side of graphic texture rather than legible text. In my communications career, I manipulated text to bring precise meaning. Rendering text to make it less clear goes against my natural inclination. It is a different way of working that I find particularly challenging. However, if I take off my communications hat and put on my artist's cap, I'm presented with another approach. It's an approach that's exciting to explore because, like the Garden of Forking Paths, multiple meanings become possible. I'm reminded of Joseph Albers' advice. Albers was an artist and teacher, considered to be one of America's most influential art teachers of his time. He advised, "We do not always create works of art, but rather experiments. It is not our ambition to fill museums. We are gathering experience." Another week, artists were asked to study map making and create a map of their studio. Excuse me. After sketching several ideas, a small town theme emerged. The different work zones in my studio were characterized as storefronts in a community. At the same time, I was studying book structures with binder Stephanie Wolf. This is a 3-layer accordion, also known as a star book. The studio map got deconstructed and reconfigured into the book structure. The buildings were fussy cut and attached to the window openings. A small edition of this handmade book is available for sale. Scribbled Lives led me out of my comfort zone. It was a supportive environment where I felt free to play with new ideas, techniques, and materials. It was a joy to be part of this group for 2 years while developing a disciplined art practice. In a class with Brody called Graphic Drama, I needed a quote about breaking the rules. I went back 25 years to a text I composed for ABC Canada. It perfectly suited the homework assignment. The exercise was to design novel letters using an automatic pen. I started with one letter, then created each subsequent letter by responding to the one I just made. This is a spontaneous way to work. There are no mistakes, just challenges to stretch my inventiveness. When there's no such thing as a mistake, there's no pressure to make a perfect letter, and there's freedom to draw without judgment. I explored the shapes an automatic pen could make on its edge and its corners. The letters were not intended to form a cohesive alphabet. They were experiments. However, a logical next step would be to choose a skeletal form and use it to design an alphabet. Brody's experimental workshops are a touchstone and have empowered me to develop a freer approach to using text in art. Sometimes the text is legible, sometimes it's not. But the art is always anchored in meaning. Sometimes a text calls for something extra. This haiku came about in the deep silence one sleepless night. It became the inspiration to design an alphabet. I used horizontal fill strokes to resemble the Venetian blinds that glared back in the dark silence. The letters took several days to design and render by hand using a fine liner. Years ago, I was browsing in a vintage shop and came home with a wire purse. It's a strange thing, a receptacle to hold valuables, yet with openings where loss is most probable. It intrigued me. At the time, I had no idea what it would become, but felt sure it had a future. Sometimes materials follow me home because they know I will need them later. More than a decade later, I was invited to design a piece of art about discipleship. The text is from the Gospel of Mark and is about being vulnerable and fearful, yet still choosing to be open in the sacrifice of service. There's a fuller story behind this piece, and I invite you to visit my website to read it. Search for the story under the title, Come, Follow Me. Over the years, I've made a point of considering how the materials and the composition enhance the text to augment meaning. I intentionally select words that I care about. Sometimes this means writing my own words. Caring about the message gives me a reason to invest the time, materials, and emotional energy in creating art. Art can be therapeutic, as I mentioned earlier. As my mother-in-law's health declined, I was thinking about dementia and its impact not only on the sufferer, but also her family. So began a series on cognition and memory loss. To compose a text, I took a random newspaper article, crossed out words that did not belong, and retained ones that ultimately formed a coherent message. Setting aside the redacted text, the remaining words were lifted from the news article without disturbing their order of appearance. This way of composing text leads to astonishing results. Meaning is derived from an intuitive, almost blind perspective. Every week I meet online with my study group. During a discussion, one of the members, David Gasser, was making a point and used the term word soup. He explained that word soup is a Spanish term used to describe the content of tabloid magazines. The term got me thinking that dementia sufferers who lose their grip on language may feel that meaning floats randomly in a soup bowl. As they scoop up the right words to serve up their thoughts, they may find their soup ladle is like a slotted spoon, where meaning disappears through the openings. This collage is made from the pages of several reference books. The beloved books belonged to my mother-in-law, an accomplished musician and wordsmith who had lost the capability to ever use them again. I could tell from the handwritten margin notes that they were special to her. The dog-eared pages had already separated from their spines. To deconstruct them further seemed heartless. Taking a sharp blade to ultimately sever the pages felt brutal. Even tearing them gently seemed abusive. Not often do the materials I use break my heart. Words embedded in the collage represent the fleeting thoughts and anxieties of a troubled mind. Completing the composition is a Campbell's soup label, a nod to Andy Warhol. Things float around the studio that I don't know what to do with, like the pages dipped in fabric dye. After more than 2 years, they were still waiting for the right words to land. Last spring, I learned of Judy Dietrich, who, as the Friends of Calligraphy well know, is a lettering artist and book artist. She was offering an online class on manuscript book design. I was thrilled to have the opportunity to study with her. She capably bridged the gap between calligraphy and book design. For the assignment, I chose a poem titled High Flight. When folded, the book pages were tall and slim, just right for a poem about flight. At about the same time, my husband was writing the eulogy for his mother's funeral, and unbeknownst to me, chose the same poem. The project evolved, and this book is now dedicated to the memory of his parents. Following the class, I was excited to learn more about traditional binding. I realized a deep dive into classic binding would round out my skill set and broaden my binding options. Subsequently, I spent a week with Barbara Helander in her bookbinding intensive class. Here's Barb in the second row on the far right. Oops. She connected the dots for many of the skills I picked up randomly over the years. It's a new beginning as I chart my journey to integrating lettering more fully with the book arts. And that brings you up to date on what I've been doing for the past 40 plus years. I've come a long way since the early days of defacing the walls of our house. This is my current pencil work. I'm no longer drawing on walls. I've found other surfaces that are just as appealing to work on. So far, I've talked about artwork, materials and tools, and techniques. These relate to the physical, tangible aspects of calligraphy. In the final segment, I want to share insights about soft skills, the life lessons I've learned. On your own journey, you may be encountering stumbling blocks and struggles. Perhaps it will help to know you are not alone. I want to talk for a few moments about staying motivated and maintaining your momentum, how to get moving again if you are stalled. The second life lesson has to do with integrating life and art. More about that in a moment. Firstly, I want to address 4 hurdles to staying motivated. Let me share ways that I've found to maintain momentum and to keep from tripping over those stumbling blocks. Stumbling block number 1. Who of us during COVID was able to resist online workshops? The fear of missing out was real. I was taking more workshops than I could keep up with. It was necessary to pace myself and to be selective about the topics that were significant to my art practice. After a workshop, it was useful to have a strategy to reinforce what I learned. There were handouts to review, recordings to watch, and notes to make for future reference. When I do not have a plan to practice, then the lesson becomes a lost opportunity. Years ago, I came to the realization that becoming a skilled calligrapher was not about the number of workshops I took, nor the desire to be skilled, nor the intention to practice. It was about actually practicing. Sitting at my desk, tool in hand, putting in the hours and lettering. The key was to develop habits to strengthen skills. For me, that was the stumbling block, taking practice and making it a habit. Dancer and choreographer Twyla Tharp has written a book called The Creative Habit. And while dance is not the same as lettering, they are both creative pursuits that demand discipline. Twyla Tharp shares many ideas in her book. One of the best takeaways that has helped me is her advice to leave something undone at the end of the day. This feels counterintuitive because I was always taught to end the day with things tidied up. However, leaving something unfinished allows me to start the next session with a defined task. It's always easier to get rolling when there's a focused place to start. Stumbling block number 2. Another piece of advice comes from painter and writer Lori Doctor. She says of her own practice, it is in the process of doing that I make discoveries, that I find my way. Don't wait until you have done all the research, got all the right materials, or have the right amount of time. Just begin. You will find out where you need to go by going. I'm good at procrastinating. Sometimes it stems from fear. That's when I find myself waiting for all the stars to align. However, that only happens in outer space. My practice occurs in the inner space. I have within me the power to align the internal stars. When I begin, things happen. Things that are unexpected and mysterious and surprising. Just begin. Stumbling block number 3. Then there are those concepts that go off on tangents and end up nowhere. In my studio, there are abandoned projects tucked here and there. They are waiting for the rainy day that never comes. Not because it doesn't rain, but because I am reluctant to abandon a project I invested in. I'm not talking about the ideas that are simmering on the back burner, waiting for the timer to ring. I'm talking about the ones that have been stewing for a long, long time and have lost their flavor, their essence. Their time has passed. Henry Cloud, in his book Necessary Endings, explains that everything has a life cycle and eventually comes to an end. However, some things do not reach their natural conclusion, and we have to intentionally close them down. When I worked in pathology, one of my jobs was to attend autopsies. When a life ends and the medical reason is unclear, an autopsy is conducted. The purpose is to determine the cause of death, so there's closure for the medical team and the family. Postmortems are valuable because there's something to be learned before the file is closed. Some of those projects I've tucked away need a postmortem. My relationship with those projects has ended. During the postmortem, I can grieve the loss and cremate the remains. Something valuable might rise from the ashes. It's true the concept had potential. It's true the materials and the time were an investment. I'll never get them back. However, when I release something that I hold in my heart, I can open up space for something fresh that excites me enough to finish it. In the same way that we just begin, we also need to declare an end. Stumbling block number 4. I met with a group of calligraphers to discuss what sparks our creativity. One calligrapher confessed, "I cannot do something unless I really care about it. And so then I get really complicated. And that is why I burn out. It seems I never do anything uncomplicated." That is a scenario I have also struggled with. Complex projects let me dig deep to unearth their meaning. That is the joy of what I do. Explore the heart of meaning. I can't say that I have a solution for burnout. What I do know is that I don't seem to have it in me to scale back. It's not in my nature. However, what I have done is be kind to myself. That may mean putting down my tools for a few days or a few weeks. I acknowledge that I just need a break from the demands of creative output. Perhaps the solution is not to avoid burnout, but to watch for warning signs and manage them. In that same discussion, another artist said that she gives herself permission to be okay when work does not turn out as she imagined. Because of time and health constraints, she listens to her body and allows herself to be satisfied with where the work is at that moment and move on. Perhaps it is our own expectations that trip us up. It is ourselves who are the stumbling block. Managing our own expectations is a grace we can give ourselves. Besides tips for staying motivated, the final life lesson I want to share has to do with integrating life and art. What do I mean? Let me take you back a few years when I was chatting with my colleague Heather. Over lunch, she was telling me about the joys of her career, what she called her heart's work. She had found her niche, a place where she could have an impact that expressed her core values. That started me thinking about my own career and whether it was still my heart's work. It seemed that work was taking up so much of me that there was less of me for other passions, including art. After 40 fulfilling years in the workplace, I decided it was time to turn the corner to see what was around it. As a new retiree, I was looking forward to spending time in my studio, leisurely doing what I wanted at my own pace. Several months into retirement, I had unexpected surgery that led to a heart complication. As I lay in the recovery room with hospital monitors blinking and beeping, it struck me that I could live for 30 years or 30 seconds. I admit that sounds highly dramatic, but at the time, it was a loud, jarring wake-up call. Following recovery, I adopted a different perspective. Earlier, I had turned down a study opportunity with Amity and Brody. However, it was not too late to hop on a plane to Rome. The 2 weeks gave me a chance to reflect on what I would do next and how I would approach the next stretch of my artist journey. The theme of time was on my mind. I considered the paradox of having lots of time and yet not lots of time. Lots of leisure time in retirement and yet not lots of time in this season of my life. I felt a sense of urgency to live more intentionally. For the class, we were asked to write about a subject that affected us deeply. The word urgency came out of my journaling and ended up on a page in the book I was making. On field trips through the Italian countryside, we passed through long, dark tunnels. The silhouetted light at the end of a tunnel looked like the letter A. I placed a drawing of a tunnel strategically on my page. That introduced the possibility of changing the meaning of the text from urgency to you are agency. I am the agent of change in my life. In my hands, I hold every minute of my time. I don't get any more than what's coming to me. But taking hold of each and every moment has me living with intention. When I don't have time for art, it may be because I don't make time for art. This is a page from a book by fellow classmate Lonnie Watts, who was in that same class in Italy. As you look deeply into the iris, you will see that she also had time in her sights. As my artist journey continues, I can embark on my heart's work with a fresh start. The clock is reset, and I begin. It's a new day. Each day is a new day. One final story before I close. While in Italy, the class went on a field trip to view medieval choir books. Amity returned with the photo on the left. By the next morning, she had meticulously drawn the letter on the right. By doing, she connected with what she was living. By integrating an experience into her art, she was reinforcing that memory and refining her skill. That act of making, of combining the moment and the experience, of integrating the time and the place, makes me think there's a mindset that makes art part of living and living part of art. I'm beginning to think that if I want to make time for calligraphy, I would do well to develop the mindset of integrating life and art. Art and letters. Letters and connections. Connections and spirituality. Spirituality and practice. Practice and life. The marks we make with our hands today will live on for years into the future. Perhaps to be found by someone who kept them to remember us. The conversations we had, the memories we made, and the heartbeats we shared. Tomorrow is a new day. Just begin. Thank you for your attention and for letting me into your space to share my story. I hope you have found something here that speaks to your journey.
Thank you so much, Lily. This has been inspirational. I especially love your stumbling blocks, and they're all good lessons for all of us. I do appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, we did have one in the chat that I remember, and that is where to buy the book you said was available.
Which book is that, Elena?
You said that you had a little book that was a small version of a book that was available for purchase.
Oh, the studio tour book? Is that the one? Sorry, let me go back and I'll
I don't remember. Whoever asked the question, maybe you can help me. Yeah, feel free to unmute.
I think it was the multiple layered accordion book.
yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. That is the studio tour book. Sorry, let me stop sharing here so I can actually see people. Let me yeah, that's the studio tour book, and it's available. You can if you go to my website, there's a contact page, and you can just contact me, and I'll be happy to be in touch with you.
well, that's great. I have a silly question. You said something.
Oh, there are no silly questions. No silly questions.
You mentioned fussy cutting. What do you mean?
What is that? Yeah, I actually was watching a YouTube video, and this woman she's a crafter, and she had all these little things that needed to be cut and then glued, and so she called it fussy cutting, and I thought it was a term. So I thought, well, I'll be smart and call it fussy cutting.
I like
So
it. I think it's
cutting
great.
little things that are
It's a
that are
quilt.
fussy.
It's a quilting term. It comes from
Oh,
quilting. Fussing cutting is when you cut out small pieces, usually around a printed design, to incorporate in your quilt.
Cool.
well, there you go. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Evelyn. Any more questions? Or do you need to ponder things?
That was
no.
a lot of information. I know I threw a lot of information at you in the last
Not
hour or so.
Margaret Morgan speaking.
Hi,
I don't have a question so much, just to say thank you, because I identified with quite a lot of what you were talking about in terms of losing your way. Something distracts you. I had not just the lockdown problems, but after that, hip surgery twice.
Oh.
And you kind of lose the plot of what you want to do and when you want to do it, because you just don't feel either physically or mentally capable of doing it. And at the moment, I'm finding that it's taking me away from calligraphy, but more into drawing and printmaking. And I'm hoping that by doing that, I will get back to calligraphy eventually. But I've found what you've showed us incredibly inspiring. So thank you very much indeed.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. Yeah, I think we don't talk about these kinds of things. We think, oh, we'll produce because on Instagram and on Facebook, people are producing all this stuff. And life happens. And journeys aren't straight. You go down these side paths and then you come back. And maybe you won't come back to calligraphy. I know you will probably come back to calligraphy, but I know some people who have gone down a path and they, that's a more interesting path for them, or because of their health or whatever, family obligations or whatever the limitations are. Calligraphy is not an option anymore. And so you go down another path. It's all creative and it all brings
I think it's just because you, as you quite rightly pointed out, you lose the habit of practice and thinking in that way. And once it's left you, it's pretty hard to get back. You feel as though you're about 3 miles behind everybody else and you can't catch up anymore. and things that you see on Instagram are depressing rather than inspiring, you know, because you think, I can't do that anymore. So I looked for something else and I found it partly in lockdown in the drawing terms. And now printmaking has reared its head and I'm enjoying both. But I haven't lifted a pen for a very long time. I just admire everybody else's.
But it's not a race. It's not a race, and there are different lanes. So we walk down a lane and then we run down another lane and maybe we come back to the main highway. It's all, I think it's just all part of the journey. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves when we think we have to that's the expectations I was talking about, managing your expectations.
Yes.
Put them aside, Margaret. Go draw. Do your
Okay.
thinking.
Thanks for the permission. I will.
You don't need my permission. You just need.
No, I need to allow myself to do it. I think that's the difficulty.
Let's go. Let's go.
Questions?
My name's Erica Ferd.
Hi,
And,
Erica.
Hi, Silly. And I just wanted to show you this that I still have. Do you remember that? You made
I
that
do.
one?
I do. It was a
It goes
Christmas
on my tree
ornament.
every year.
Well, I'm glad you
that was a
still.
long time ago.
Well, I'm glad you still enjoy it.
I do, and I've really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. So I miss you, but thank you. Very interesting.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I guess we can say goodbye. Thank you very much for your attention and not interrupting the flow of Lily's talk. Appreciate that extremely much. And I wish you all a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lena, for doing that.
Bye.
Nancy.
Thank you. It was beautiful.
No,
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you, Lily.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.